Why would a heart surgeon hand a secret envelope to my estranged father while I was being put under for a major operation? The moment I discovered what was inside, I realized just how far my father was willing to go to steal everything I'd built. By the time he opened that envelope, I was ready, and so was my revenge. The fluorescent lights in the cardiac wing of Riverside Medical Center hummed overhead as I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, my legs dangling like a child's. At 37, I'd built a tech company worth 8 figures, but in that moment, wearing a thin hospital gown that barely covered my back, I felt as vulnerable as the 5-year-old boy my father had abandoned decades ago. "Colin, you need to relax," my mother, Laura Mercer, said softly, adjusting the blanket around my shoulders. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her calm demeanor, I could see the worry lines etched deeper around her eyes. She'd been my rock through everything, raising me alone, supporting my dreams, celebrating my successes. Now, at 59, she was trying to hold it together for what could be my final hours. "He's right to be nervous," came the familiar voice from the corner of the room. Roger Mercer, my father, stood with his arms crossed, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early morning hour. At 62, he still carried himself with the same arrogant confidence that had once charmed my mother into marriage and later convinced her he was worth a second chance. "Heart surgery isn't exactly a walk in the park, son." I bristled at the word son. Roger had lost the right to call me that when he walked out on us 32 years ago, leaving behind only debt and broken promises. His recent reappearance in my life, coinciding suspiciously with my company's growing success, felt more like a vulture circling wounded prey than a father showing genuine concern. "The procedure has a 95% success rate," I said, more to reassure my mother than to engage with him. "Dr. Warren is one of the best cardiac surgeons on the West Coast." Of course," Roger nodded, but his eyes were scanning the room, taking in the expensive private suite, the state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. I'd seen that calculating look before, the same expression he'd worn when he'd started asking pointed questions about my company's valuation and my succession planning. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Felix Warren entered, tall and composed, with the kind of steady presence that inspired confidence in patients facing life-threatening procedures. Behind him, a young surgical assistant wheeled in a cart of preoperative equipment. "Good morning, Colin," Dr. Warren said, his voice warm but professional. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded, though my mouth felt dry. "As ready as anyone can be for having their chest cracked open." Dr. Warren smiled. "We'll take excellent care of you. The procedure should take about 4 hours. When you wake up, you'll have a new lease on life." He turned to my parents. "You're welcome to wait in the family lounge. We'll update you every hour." As the assistant began preparing the preoperative medications, I caught something odd in Dr. Warren's expression when he looked at Roger. There was a flicker of recognition, almost like they knew each other, but before I could process it fully, the surgical team was wheeling me toward the operating theater. The pre-op area was a sterile, whitewashed space filled with the quiet efficiency of medical professionals preparing for surgery. As they transferred me to the operating table, I could see my parents through the observation window. My mother pressed her hand to the glass, her lips moving in what I knew was a prayer. Roger stood beside her, but his attention seemed elsewhere, focused on something the surgical assistant was showing him. "All right, Colin," the anesthesiologist said, placing the mask over my face. "Count backward from 10 for me." 10, 9, 8. The world began to blur around the edges, sounds becoming muffled and distant. But just as consciousness started to slip away, I heard Dr. Warren's voice, quiet but distinct, speaking to his assistant. "Give this envelope to his father later. Make sure it's discreet." 7, 6. The words echoed in my fading awareness, sending a chill through me that had nothing to do with the operating room's temperature. Why would my surgeon be passing secret messages to Roger? What could possibly be in that envelope? 5, 4, 3. Darkness claimed me, but those whispered words followed me into the void. When I woke up, the world felt different. My chest was wrapped in bandages, tubes snaked from my arms, and every breath was a conscious effort. The surgery had been successful. I was alive, and according to the monitors beeping around me, my new heart valve was functioning perfectly. "Hey there, sweetheart." My mother's voice was the first thing I heard clearly. She was sitting beside my bed, her hand gently stroking my hair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I managed to croak, my throat raw from the breathing tube. "The doctor says everything went perfectly," she said, tears of relief streaming down her face. "You're going to be fine, Colin. You're going to be just fine." I tried to sit up, wincing at the sharp pain in my chest. "Where's Roger?" "He stepped out to make some phone calls," she said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. There was tension there, a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before the surgery. "Mom, is everything okay?" She hesitated, glancing toward the door. "I'm sure it's nothing, but your father has been acting strange since you went into surgery. He's been very secretive, whispering with the nurses, asking questions about your business." A chill ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the pain medication. "What kind of questions?" "About your company, about who's in charge while you're recovering. He even asked if you'd signed any papers recently, giving him authority to make decisions." She frowned. "I told him that was ridiculous, that you'd never do such a thing without telling me." My heart rate monitor began beeping faster, and I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths. Through the small window in my room door, I could see into the hallway where Roger was standing near the nurse's station. As I watched, one of Dr. Warren's surgical assistants approached him and discreetly handed him a thick manila envelope. Roger glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then quickly tucked the envelope inside his jacket. A sharp chill ran through me. The envelope. The one Dr. Warren had whispered about during my surgery. Roger caught sight of me watching through the window and flashed me his most charming smile, the one I remembered from childhood, the one that had always preceded disappointment. He headed back toward my room, his hand unconsciously patting the hidden envelope. As he reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed on the bedside table. My mother handed it to me, and I saw a calendar alert flashing on the screen. Annual shareholders meeting in 6 days. 6 days. In 6 days, the board of directors of Mercer Innovations would gather for our yearly meeting, and whatever was in that envelope, whatever secret arrangement Dr. Warren had made with my father, it was connected to my company, the business I'd built from nothing, the life's work that had cost me relationships, sleep, and apparently my health. Roger entered the room with false concern painted on his face. "How's my boy feeling?" But I was no longer looking at a father. I was looking at a predator who had been circling for months, waiting for exactly this moment, when I would be weak, vulnerable, and dependent on others' care. The envelope crinkled softly as he moved, and I realized that whatever was inside it, whatever plan he'd set in motion while I was unconscious and fighting for my life, it was already too late to stop it from the confines of this hospital bed. Or so he thought. Lying in that hospital bed, watching Roger's carefully staged display of fatherly concern, memories came rushing back with startling clarity. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe coming so close to the edge has a way of stripping away the comforting stories we tell ourselves about family. But I could finally see the pattern, a 32-year cycle of absence, manipulation, and greed. I was 5 when Roger first vanished from my life. One morning he was there, making promises about taking me fishing and teaching me how to throw a baseball, and the next his closet was empty, except for wire hangers and the faint trace of his cologne. He left behind a mountain of debt, a devastated wife, and a confused little boy who spent years wondering what he'd done wrong. My mother never spoke badly of him, Not once. Even when we lost the house, even when she worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, even when I asked why Daddy didn't love us anymore, she'd just hold me close and say, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, honey. It doesn't mean they don't love you." But I learned the truth when I was 16, and Roger reappeared like a ghost from a past I'd tried to forget. I'd just won a statewide science fair with a computer program I'd written, and the local newspaper had run a story about the young tech prodigy from Riverside. 3 days later, Roger was on our doorstep with flowers for my mother and a baseball glove for me. 12 years too late. "I've changed, Laura," I remembered him saying, his voice thick with what seemed like genuine emotion. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I want to be part of Colin's life. I want to be the father he deserves." My mother, ever hopeful, ever forgiving, had let him back in. Not all the way. She never remarried him, never fully trusted him with her heart again, but she'd allowed him to visit, to take me out for awkward dinners where he'd ask probing questions about my programming projects and my plans for the future. I'd been young enough to want his approval, old enough to recognize his insincerity. Roger was charming when it suited him, generous with promises and stingy with follow-through. He'd show up for my high school graduation but miss my birthday. He'd promise to help with college tuition but disappear when the bills came due. He was a master of being present for the moments that reflected well on him and absent when real sacrifice was required. The pattern became clearer in college. Whenever I achieved something, winning a programming competition, getting an internship at a prestigious tech company, having my senior project featured in a technology magazine, Roger would suddenly become more attentive. He'd call more often, suggest we grab lunch, casually ask about my business prospects, and whether I'd ever considered bringing family into the company. After graduation, I'd started Mercer Innovations in my mother's garage with $15,000 in savings and a revolutionary idea for streamlining corporate data management. Roger had shown minimal interest during those early months when I was living on ramen noodles and working 18-hour days. But as soon as the company landed its first major contract, he'd appeared at my office with a bottle of champagne and unsolicited advice about scaling operations and bringing in experienced management. "You're young, son," he'd said, settling into the chair across from my desk like he belonged there. "Youth is great for innovation, but business requires wisdom, experience. I've been around the block a few times. I could help you avoid the pitfalls I've seen other young entrepreneurs fall into." I'd politely declined, but Roger had persisted. As Mercer Innovations grew from a garage startup to a legitimate company with real offices and actual employees, his suggestions became more frequent and more specific. He'd recommend strategic partners who turned out to be his drinking buddies looking for investment opportunities. He'd suggest restructuring the leadership team to include more seasoned voices. He'd hint that my health was suffering from the stress, and maybe it was time to share the burden with family. The truth was, Roger had never built anything in his life. His resume was a graveyard of failed ventures, a restaurant that closed after 6 months, a real estate scheme that barely skirted fraud charges, a consulting business that existed mainly on paper. He was a dreamer and a schemer, but never a doer. He wanted the rewards of success without the sacrifice it required. My mother, bless her heart, couldn't see it. She wanted so badly to believe that Roger had genuinely changed, that his newfound interest in my life came from love rather than greed. She'd invite him to family dinners where he'd regale us with stories of his business connections and his ideas for taking Mercer Innovations to the next level. "He means well," she'd tell me after these dinners, usually when she caught me rolling my eyes at his latest grandiose suggestion. "He's proud of you, Colin. He wants to be involved." But I could see through the charm. Roger didn't want to be involved. He wanted to be in charge. He wanted the prestige of being associated with a successful company without having earned it. He wanted to walk into boardrooms and country clubs and introduce himself as the CEO of Mercer Innovations, basking in the respect and admiration that came with the title. In recent months, as my health problems had become more apparent and the need for surgery more urgent, Roger's interest had intensified. He'd started showing up at the office unannounced, charming my receptionist and chatting with employees about how things were going and whether they were concerned about leadership continuity. He'd ask pointed questions about our corporate structure, our board composition, our emergency succession plans. "You need to think about what happens if something goes wrong," he'd said during one particularly uncomfortable conversation. "You're young, you think you're invincible, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. What happens to all these people you employ if you're not around to run things?" I'd assured him that I had contingency plans, that my operations manager and legal team were more than capable of handling day-to-day operations during my recovery. But Roger had pressed the issue, suggesting that the board might feel more comfortable with family oversight during my absence. Family oversight. The phrase had made my skin crawl back then, and lying in that hospital bed with Roger's envelope weighing heavy in his jacket, it felt like a final verdict on everything I'd spent my life building. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the present. A text from my operations manager, Kalia Meyer. "Your dad's been asking accounting weird questions. Should I worry?" I stared at the message, my heart rate monitor picking up speed again. Kalia was sharp, observant, and fiercely protective of the company we'd built together. If she was worried, I should be terrified. Roger noticed my phone and leaned forward with false concern. "Everything okay, son? You look troubled." "Just work stuff," I managed, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Well, you don't need to worry about any of that now," he said, his hand unconsciously moving to pat the envelope again. "You just focus on getting better. Let the people who care about you handle the business side of things. The people who care about you. As if he'd ever cared about anything other than what he could take from me." I closed my eyes, pretending to be tired, but my mind was racing. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever arrangement he'd made with Dr. Warren, it was connected to my company. And if Kalia was already noticing unusual behavior, it meant Roger's plan was already in motion. 6 days until the shareholders' meeting. 6 days to figure out what he was planning and how to stop it. 6 days to protect everything I'd built from the man who'd already stolen my childhood and was now coming for my life's work. But Roger had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me before, and he was doing it again. He saw a sick man in a hospital bed, weak and vulnerable and dependent on others' care. He didn't see the same 5-year-old boy who'd learned to be self-reliant when his father abandoned him, who'd built a company from nothing because he'd never been able to count on anyone but himself. I might be flat on my back with a chest full of stitches, but my mind was sharp, and my resolve was stronger than ever. Roger wanted a war. He was about to get one. 3 days post-surgery, I was finally strong enough to sit up for extended periods and take short walks around the cardiac wing. The doctors were pleased with how I was recovering, but I could still catch the concern in their eyes when they checked my pressure. Stress wasn't good for a mending heart, and I was practically humming with tension. Roger had been playing the devoted father role perfectly, bringing me magazines, adjusting my pillows, and making small talk with the nursing staff. But I'd been watching him carefully, and the cracks in his performance were starting to show. He kept checking his phone, stepping out for important calls, and asking seemingly innocent questions about my business operations. "You know, Colin," he said during one of his visits, settling into the chair beside my bed with practiced casualness, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding succession planning." I kept my expression neutral. "I don't recall discussing succession planning with you." "Well, not directly," he backtracked smoothly, "but with everything that's happened, it got me thinking. You're young, you're going to be fine, but this whole experience must have made you realize how important it is to have contingencies in place." "I have contingencies," I said carefully. Of course, of course. But I mean real contingencies, family involvement, someone who genuinely cares about your well-being stepping in if you're not able to make decisions. He leaned forward, his voice slipping into that concerned, fatherly tone that had fooled my mother for years. I know we haven't always been close, but family is family. I'd hate to see everything you've built fall into the wrong hands if something unexpected were to happen. There it was, the opening gambit. He was testing the waters, seeing how receptive I might be to the idea of him having some official role in my company's leadership structure. The company is in excellent hands, I replied. My team is more than capable of handling operations during my recovery. Your team, yes, but teams can be influenced. Boards can be swayed by outside interests. What you need is someone with real authority, someone who can't be bought or pressured. He paused, letting that sink in. Someone with a legal stake in protecting your interests. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Legal stake, authority. The envelope in his jacket seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. I appreciate your concern, I said slowly, but I'm confident in my current arrangements. Roger's smile faltered slightly, just for a moment, before snapping back into place. Of course, I'm probably overthinking things. It's just, well, when you almost lose someone you care about, it puts things in perspective. After he left that evening, I immediately called my lawyer and longtime friend, Dane Rutledge. Dane and I had known each other since college, and he'd handled all of Mercer Innovations' legal work from day one. If anyone could help me understand what Roger might be planning, it was him. Colin, how are you feeling? Dane's voice was warm with genuine concern when he picked up. Like I've been hit by a truck, but that's not why I'm calling. I kept my voice low, conscious that hospital walls were thin. I need you to review something for me. Urgently. What's going on? I told him about the envelope, about Roger's sudden interest in succession planning, about the strange questions he'd been asking my staff. Dane listened without interrupting, but I could hear the concern growing in his silence. Colin, this sounds serious. If your father is planning some kind of takeover attempt, we need to understand exactly what legal vulnerabilities exist. What kind of vulnerabilities? Well, there are several ways someone could potentially challenge your authority during a medical crisis. Power of attorney, guardianship proceedings, emergency board resolutions. The specifics would depend on your corporate bylaws and any existing legal documents. A sharp chill ran through me. What would he need to make something like that work? Documentation, medical opinions about your capacity to make decisions, possibly forged signatures or manipulated board votes. Dane paused. Colin, I need to ask you directly. Have you signed anything recently? Any papers your father might have presented to you? No, absolutely not. Good. But we need to be proactive here. I'm going to review all your corporate documents tonight. Look for any potential loopholes or weaknesses. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful about what you sign, even routine hospital paperwork. After hanging up with Dane, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I had someone competent on my side. Dread about what we might discover. I tried to sleep, but my mind kept racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Kalia Meyer, my operations manager, appeared at my door with a bouquet of flowers and a concerned expression that told me this wasn't a social call. How are you holding up, boss? She asked, but her eyes were scanning the room, making sure we were alone. I've been better. What's really going on, Kalia? She pulled her chair closer to my bed and lowered her voice. Your father has been asking some very strange questions. Yesterday, he cornered Janet from accounting and wanted to know about our banking procedures, who has access to what accounts, how our digital signature system works. What did Janet tell him? Nothing specific, but she was rattled. Then this morning he showed up early and was asking about our corporate bylaws. Whether we keep physical copies in the office, that sort of thing. Kalia's frown deepened. Colin, I've seen hostile takeovers before. This feels like reconnaissance. My worst fears were crystallizing into reality. What else? He's been very charming with the staff, asking about company morale, whether people are worried about leadership during your recovery. He's positioning himself as the concerned family member who just wants to help. She paused. But here's the thing that really bothers me. He seems to know things about our corporate structure that you never told him. Specific details about voting procedures, board composition, stuff that's not public knowledge. How could he know that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Either someone's been feeding him information or... She hesitated. Or what? Or he's had access to documents he shouldn't have seen. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Roger had somehow gained access to confidential corporate information, if he'd been planning this for longer than I'd realized, then whatever was in that envelope might be just the final piece of a much larger puzzle. Kalia, I need you to do something for me, I said urgently. I want you to monitor all access to our corporate accounts, digital and physical. Change any passwords that I might have used on my personal devices. And if my father shows up at the office again, don't let him pass the reception area. Already on it, she said grimly. But Colin, if he's planning what I think he's planning, he might not need access to the office anymore. That afternoon, I was dozing when my phone buzzed with an email notification. Groggily, I opened my email app and saw a message from our corporate banking system, a routine notification about account activity. But as I scanned the details, a wave of cold dread washed over me. There, attached to the email, was a scanned copy of a signature authorization form. My signature, apparently approving expanded access to our primary operating account. The signature looked perfect, identical to my usual scrawl, but I had never signed that document. I'd never even seen it before. With shaking hands, I forwarded the email to Dane with a single word. Urgent. He called back within minutes. Colin, where are you right now? In my hospital room. Why? Don't sign anything else. Don't even touch a pen until I get there. And Colin, we need to move fast. If this signature is what I think it is, your father isn't just planning a takeover. He's planning to drain your accounts while he does it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Roger's performance as the concerned father had been just that, a performance. While I'd been fighting for my life on the operating table, he'd been putting the finishing touches on a plan to steal everything I'd built. The envelope was just the beginning, and I had less than 3 days until the shareholders' meeting to figure out how to stop him. Dane arrived at the hospital within the hour, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from rushing. He carried a briefcase stuffed with documents and wore the grim expression of a lawyer who'd discovered something terrible. We need to talk somewhere private, he said without preamble. I was strong enough now to walk short distances, so we made our way to a small consultation room down the hall from my room. Dane spread documents across the table like a general planning a military campaign. Colin, this is worse than we thought, he began, pointing to the forged signature authorization. This document would give your father access to your primary business accounts. But it's not just one signature. I found 3 other suspicious documents in the banking system, all apparently signed by you in the past week. While I was unconscious, or heavily sedated. Exactly. But here's the really concerning part. These aren't amateur forgeries. Whoever did this had access to multiple examples of your signature and the technical knowledge to create convincing digital copies. He pulled out another document. I also reviewed your corporate bylaws, and there's a clause that could be problematic. What kind of clause? Emergency succession provision. If the CEO is deemed medically incapacitated and unable to fulfill their duties, the board can appoint an interim leader. Normally, that would be your COO or another executive, but if a family member with business experience volunteers and the board agrees, he could actually become CEO? Temporarily, yes. But Colin, Here's what really worries me. For this to work, your father would need medical documentation supporting the claim that you're incapacitated, and given that Dr. Warren seems to be involved somehow, the full scope of Roger's plan was becoming clear. It wasn't just financial fraud, it was a complete corporate coup, orchestrated while I was at my most vulnerable. What can we do? Several things, but we need to move carefully. First, I'm freezing all corporate accounts pending investigation of the fraudulent signatures. Second, I'm calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow, before the scheduled shareholders meeting, to address these irregularities. Dane's expression hardened. And third, we're going to set a trap. While Dane worked on the legal aspects, I called Kalaya to coordinate our response from the operational side. She'd been busy gathering intelligence, and what she'd discovered was both alarming and useful. Your father made another appearance at the office this morning, she reported. This time he brought someone with him, a notary public. They were asking about accessing your office safe, claiming you'd given permission for document retrieval. Please tell me you didn't let them in. Of course not. But Colin, they seemed very confident, like they expected to be accommodated. The notary even had paperwork with what looked like your signature authorizing the access. More forged documents. Roger's plan was comprehensive and sophisticated, which meant he'd been working on it for longer than I'd initially realized. Did you get the notary's information? Better than that. I recorded the entire conversation. Legally, of course, since our office has posted notices about security recording. Kalia's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Your father made some very interesting statements about his authority to act on your behalf during your medical crisis. Send me that recording immediately. Already in your secure email. But Colin, there's something else. I did some digging into Dr. Warren's background. Turns out he and your father have a connection. They were both investors in a failed real estate venture about 5 years ago. Warren lost a significant amount of money when the deal went south. The pieces were falling into place. Roger had leverage over Dr. Warren, probably financial, and had used it to gain access to medical information and possibly to influence the content of that mysterious envelope. Kalia, I need you to compile everything we have, the recordings, the access logs, copies of all the suspicious documents. We're going to expose this whole scheme, but we need ironclad evidence. That evening, while Roger was out of the hospital making his important phone calls, I had a difficult conversation with my mother. She'd been sensing the tension, but hadn't understood its source. It was time to tell her the truth. Mom, I need to show you something, I said, pulling up the forged signature documents on my tablet. These are banking authorizations that supposedly bear my signature, but I never signed them. She studied the screen, her face growing pale. Colin, these look exactly like your signature. They're forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Mom, Roger isn't here because he's concerned about my health. He's here because he's trying to steal my company. I walked her through everything. The envelope, the suspicious questions, the forged documents, the connection to Dr. Warren. With each revelation, her expression grew more stricken. But why would he do this? She whispered. He's your father. No, Mom. A father is someone who's there when you need him, who supports you and protects you. Roger is a stranger who happens to share my DNA and wants to profit from my success. She was quiet for a long time, processing the betrayal. Finally, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes, but steel in her voice. What do you need me to do? I need you to be strong. Tomorrow there's going to be a confrontation, and it's not going to be pretty. Roger is going to deny everything, probably try to make me look paranoid or unstable. I need you to remember what I've shown you tonight. I'll remember, she said firmly. And Colin, I'm proud of you, for building something amazing, for being strong enough to fight for it, and for being nothing like him. The next morning brought the call I'd been dreading. Dane's voice was tense when he reached me. Colin, Your father just showed up at First National Bank with a notarized power of attorney document, trying to access your corporate accounts. The bank manager called me instead of processing the request because the timing seemed suspicious. Did they give him access? No, but it was close. The document looked legitimate, and if we hadn't already flagged the account for suspicious activity, they might have complied. Dane paused. Colin, this ends today. The emergency board meeting is set for this afternoon. Every director will be there, along with our corporate attorney. It's time to end this. As I hung up the phone, Roger appeared in my doorway with his usual fake smile and a cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria. Morning, son. How are you feeling today? Much better, I said, and for the first time in days, it was true. In fact, I'm feeling strong enough to attend a board meeting this afternoon. For just a moment, his composure cracked. The coffee cup trembled slightly in his hand, and his eyes darted to his jacket pocket where the envelope still rested. A board meeting? Don't you think that's a bit premature? You should be focusing on your recovery, not worrying about business. Oh, I'm not worried about business at all, I said calmly. In fact, I'm looking forward to clearing up some recent irregularities. Should be very enlightening. Roger's smile became strained. What kind of irregularities? You'll find out this afternoon. I assume you'll want to attend? After all, some of the discussion will directly concern you. He left shortly after that, claiming he had errands to run, but I could see the panic in his eyes. His careful plan was unraveling, and he knew it. As I prepared to leave the hospital for the first time since my surgery, I felt a strange sense of calm. For days, I'd been reacting to Roger's moves, trying to understand his plan and counter his attacks. But now, finally, I was ready to take the offensive. The envelope in his pocket might have started this war, but it was going to end with my victory. The ride from the hospital to Mercer Innovations headquarters felt like a journey between two different worlds. For the past week, I'd been trapped in a sterile environment where I was the patient, the victim, the one who needed care and protection. But as Dane's car pulled into the parking lot of the sleek glass building that housed my company, I felt my strength and authority returning. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Dane asked as he helped me out of the car. I was still moving carefully, my chest tight with healing surgical wounds, but my mind was sharp and focused. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied. The building's lobby was familiar yet strange after my absence. Employees who saw me entering offered warm smiles and words of encouragement, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They'd heard rumors, sensed the tension, and were looking to me for reassurance that their jobs and their futures were secure. "Mr. Mercer," Janet from accounting hurried over, her face flushed with obvious relief. "It's so good to see you back. We've all been so worried." "Thank you, Janet. I understand my father has been asking you some questions while I've been away." Her expression darkened. "Yes, sir. Very strange questions about account access and signature procedures. I didn't tell him anything confidential, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" "He seemed to already know things he shouldn't have known. Details about our banking protocols, our corporate structure. It made me very uncomfortable." "You did exactly the right thing by not giving him any information. Thank you for protecting the company." As we made our way to the elevator, Kalia appeared with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. "Everything's ready," she said quietly. "All the evidence is compiled. The board members have been briefed on the general situation, and our corporate attorney is already in the conference room reviewing the fraudulent documents." "What about Roger?" "He called an hour ago, very agitated, asking about the emergency meeting. I told him it was scheduled for 3 o'clock and that his attendance was requested." The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me a few moments to center myself. In my reflection in the polished steel doors, I could see the toll the past week had taken. I was pale, thinner, and there were dark circles under my eyes. But there was also something new there, a hardness that hadn't been present before. Roger's betrayal had burned away any remaining sentiment about family loyalty or second chances. "Colin," Dane said softly as we reached our floor, "I want you to prepare yourself for what's coming. When we present this evidence, Roger's going to fight back. He'll try to discredit you, probably claim you're not thinking clearly due to medication or stress. He might even get emotional, play the wounded father card." "Let him try," I said. "I have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth." We spent the next hour in my office, going through every piece of evidence one final time. The forged signatures, the suspicious banking documents, the recordings of Roger's conversations with my staff, the background information on his connection to Dr. Warren. It painted a picture of calculated, premeditated fraud. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "I want to call Dr. Warren before the meeting starts." "Colin, I'm not sure that's wise. I need to understand exactly what was in that envelope, and I think Dr. Warren might be more willing to cooperate now that he knows we're onto the scheme." I dialed the number, and Dr. Warren answered on the second ring. "Colin, how are you feeling? I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." "I'm feeling much better, Dr. Warren. Clear-headed, alert, ready to ask some difficult questions." There was a pause. "I'm not sure I understand." "I think you do. I want to know about the envelope you gave my father during my surgery. I want to know what your connection to Roger Mercer is, and I want to know what kind of medical documentation you provided him." The silence stretched long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke, his voice strained. "Colin, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. I have evidence of forged documents, fraudulent banking activity, and a conspiracy to steal my company while I was unconscious on your operating table. The only question is whether you're going to cooperate with the investigation or become a defendant in a criminal case." Another long pause. Then quietly, "The envelope contained a medical assessment stating that the surgery and anesthesia had caused temporary cognitive impairment, making you unfit to make business decisions for an indefinite period. Your father said he needed it to protect your interests while you recovered. And you believed him? He was very convincing. And I owed him a favor from a previous business relationship." "A failed real estate investment where you lost money?" "Yes." His voice was barely a whisper now. "Colin, I never intended for anyone to get hurt. I thought I was helping protect your company during your recovery." "Dr. Warren, you're going to write a new medical assessment, one that accurately reflects my current mental state and capacity, and you're going to deliver it to my office within the hour. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, absolutely. I'll prepare it immediately." After hanging up, I felt a sense of completion. The last piece of Roger's scheme was now exposed and neutralized. At 2:45, I made my way to the conference room. The entire board of directors was present. 5 successful business leaders who'd invested in Mercer Innovations and trusted me with their money. Our corporate attorney, Patricia Vance, sat at one end of the table with her own stack of documents. The atmosphere was tense but professional. "Before we begin," I announced, "I want to thank all of you for your continued confidence in this company and for taking time to address this urgent matter." "Colin," said board member Harrison Fletcher, a veteran of several tech startups, "we're all concerned about these irregularities that Dane has described. Can you walk us through what's been happening?" I was about to respond when the conference room door opened and Roger entered, his usual confident smile firmly in place. He was dressed in his best suit and carried himself like a man who belonged in the room, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said warmly. "I appreciate being included in this meeting, especially given Colin's recent health challenges." He took a seat directly across from me, and for a moment, our eyes met. In his gaze, I saw a mixture of desperation and defiance, the look of a man who knew his plan was falling apart but wasn't ready to surrender. "Roger," I said calmly, "I'm glad you're here. We have a lot to discuss." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope, the same one I'd seen Dr. Warren's assistant hand to him a week ago. It was slightly crumpled now, worn from being carried around for days. "Actually, Colin, before we begin, I think the board should see this." He placed the envelope on the table. "It's a medical assessment from Dr. Warren regarding your current mental state and capacity to make business decisions." The board members exchanged concerned glances. This was exactly what Dane had warned me about. Roger was going to try to have me declared unfit to run my own company. "That's interesting," I said, my voice steady, "because I have a medical assessment as well." "A current one?" I nodded to Patricia, who slid a document across the table. Dr. Warren's revised assessment, delivered just 20 minutes earlier, clearly stating that I was fully competent and capable of making all business decisions. Roger's face went pale as he realized his trump card had just been neutralized. "Now then," I continued, "shall we discuss the real reason for this meeting? The systematic fraud and attempted theft that's been perpetrated against this company over the past week?" I opened the folder of evidence and began laying out documents on the table. With each piece of proof, each forged signature, each recorded conversation, Roger's composure cracked a little more. The board members' expressions shifted from concern to shock to anger as the scope of the betrayal became clear. These were successful business people who understood exactly what they were looking at: a sophisticated attempt to steal a company through fraud and manipulation. "Roger," said board member Elizabeth Trenner, her voice ice cold, "do you have any response to these allegations?" Roger looked around the table, seeing no allies, no escape routes. His charming mask finally slipped completely, revealing the desperate, greedy man beneath. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "I'm his father. I'm trying to protect him, protect this company. He's not thinking clearly. The surgery, the medication. Stop." The word came out harder than I'd intended, cutting through his excuses like a blade. "You're not my father. A father doesn't abandon his 5-year-old son. A father doesn't disappear for 30 years and then reappear only when there's money to be made. A father doesn't try to steal his son's life work while he's fighting for his life on an operating table." I stood up slowly, my chest aching, but my voice strong. "You're a stranger, Roger. A stranger who happens to share my DNA and thinks that entitles him to everything I've built. But you're wrong." The room was completely silent. Even Roger had stopped trying to defend himself. "The evidence speaks for itself," I continued. "Forged signatures, fraudulent banking documents, conspiracy with a medical professional, attempted theft of corporate assets. The board will now vote on whether to refer this matter to law enforcement for criminal prosecution." "All in favor?" Patricia asked. Every hand in the room went up except Roger's. "Motion carries unanimously," Patricia announced. "Mr. Roger Mercer, you are hereby banned from all company premises and prohibited from any contact with company employees or assets. Security will escort you from the building." Roger sat there for a moment, staring at the envelope that was supposed to have been his ticket to stealing my company. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Family is all that matters in the end, Colin. When you're old and alone, you'll remember that you chose money over kin." "No, Roger," I replied. "I chose the people who earned my trust over the man who betrayed it. I chose the family I built over the one that abandoned me." As security escorted him from the room, Roger clutched that damning envelope in his hand, the final symbol of his failed scheme and our broken relationship. But I wasn't watching him leave. I was looking around the table at the faces of people who'd stood by me, who'd trusted me, who'd helped me build something worth protecting. This was my real family, and they were worth fighting for. The war was over, and I had won.